Mike Doyle is a Facebook fan that first contacted me November 30th, 2014. Here is the epic conversation that has taken place since that time. Mike Doyle, November 30th, 11:37 a.m. In my opinion, you are the only person who has made any sense at all concerning why we're here. The carefully edited contradictions surrounding all modern-day religions, and the history of mankind that has been intentionally hidden from us all. I, too, am a vehement opponent of Doyle and his oppressive, murderous mindset. Unfortunately, I see evidence of Doyle's influence across the entire geopolitical landscape still today. I believe they are mapping DNA and everyone's genealogy for a reason. The Mormons facilitate the most widely used family tree website services. I think it would be interesting to disclose exactly why there is such an interest, and what they might be planning to do with this information. Gerald Clark, November 30th, 9:39 p.m. Thanks for the support. The information war is in full swing. The Anunnaki topic is top of the list when it comes to the agenda of those who know the truth. I too was duped by the spirit of this world, like most of us have been. Once you have been stung, more caution is used when dealing with that sort of stinging flying critter. As for genealogy, having the data allows one to make claims based on genetic spawning from our Anunnaki progenitors. Thus, if one convinces the masses that they have blue blood, there is an inherent right to live off the toils of the serfs. Nothing has changed for the claims of kings gleaning their authority from the gods, being a demigod or better. Gerald Clark, November 30th, 9:42 p.m. What is silly is how diluted the monarchy bloodline is, yet they still lay claim for authority to rule over others. Mike Doyle, Deck 1st, 1:03 p.m. You speak the truth, my friend. The obvious state of our existence is the 1% who have and the 99% who have not. As the 1% continue to prosper off the slave labor of the mere mortal humans, the ungodly. I am also inclined to believe that the DNA genealogy will someday be used to determine who deserves to live, and who deserves to perish, when that time comes. In other words, that proverbial day of judgment. After all, as you have clearly exemplified by your research, the gods have cleansed the planet Earth of its ungodly slave population time and again. As a personal note between you and I, it sickens me to think that mankind continues to worship these selfish, maniacal, inbred entities that call themselves gods. If Doyle has a heart, let me be the one to pierce it with my sword. Gerald Clark, Deck 1st, 11:36 p.m. Yo Mike, you can do the knife thing after I do the chariot drag with his feet bound to my white horse in front of his suppressed primitive workers, aggregated en masse. Mike Doyle, Deck 2nd, 10:23 a.m. Sounds good, Gerald. I met a really good guy who was a Wiccan leader in Boise, Idaho. He was a really good-natured, very cool guy named John. One day, he commented to me that many pagan/Wiccan are convinced that the God of the Old Testament is not the God of the New Testament. In his own words, there is a separate asshole God, murderous, jealous, vengeful, that is far different than the benevolent God, loving, caring, forgiving. He even went as far as to say that pagan/Wiccan are pretty much in agreement with the core teachings of Jesus, but not the Old Testament. I remember when he made these comments to me, it blew my mind. Never before had I fathomed such a possibility. Now, with the research that you have embarked upon, Gerald, I can see both why and how these two opposing theologies exist today. Doyle versus Ki. And it is Doyle who is the enemy of mankind. Gerald Clark, Deck 3rd, 10:53 p.m. Seems like the truth came your way full circle thanks in part to the pagans of Idaho. Perhaps share my book and how your seeking path got you to the same conclusion. Mike Doyle, Deck 13th, 11:05 a.m. Following the lineage from Ki to Marduk to Nabu, Nebo, I am becoming more and more convinced that Moses was the Anunnaki son of the god Nebo. The name Moses was often appended as a suffix to the names of the gods Ra and Thoth to be translated as of the god Ra or of the god Thoth. Could it be that Moses was able to perform his many miracles because he was of God himself, as his name suggests? What further proof do we need? When we find that Moses ascended into heaven from Mount Nebo, Moses was seated by an Anunnaki god, and that god was surely Nebo. Therefore, it must be the same god, Nebo, who Moses was speaking to on Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. Mike Doyle, Deck 13th, 11:21 a.m. What could be more definitive proof that Moses was, in fact, of the god Nebo, than when he climbed Mount Nebo to hear God say to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Deuteronomy 34. Without a doubt, Moses was of Anunnaki origin. Gerald Clark, Deck 14th, 5:20 p.m. Hi Mike, thanks for the Anunnaki deep dive on Moses and Nebo. I will need to go back to the records to flush out Nebu's relationship to demigods. I do believe that Moses was an Lilith for sure. As for the deities Moses encountered in Exodus 32:20 at Hathor's temple on Mt. Serabat al-Kadim, or as the locals called it, Mt. Sinai, there was certainly an encounter with the Anunnaki smelting gold in the lofty temple dedicated to Inanna Hathor. Was Nebo depicted among the ritual priests or attendants therein? Have to dig it up, but do not recall seeing his name. My premise is that it was Enlil himself who Hollywood portrayed as a burning bush that copied the Egyptian righteous rules for living written by Thoth to formulate the Ten Commandments, plagiarized and forced on Moses. Thus, I would have to bulk at Nebo being the one involved, but I could be missing something. There were several folks at Hathor's temple, so cannot be sure that there were not more Anunnaki members that were not accounted for or written out of the account with Enlil's editorial oversight. Mike Doyle, Deck 16th, 5:12 a.m. Nice detailed reference to Hathor's temple, Gerald. I look forward to what you find on Nebo, or Nebo. It seems that Nebo was prayed to quite a lot around the time of Moses, 2000 BC, as the one true God. Below are some references to the god Nebo, grandson of Enki, that I have recently found. If you read between the lines, it sure sounds like Nebo was a high-ranking Anunnaki god with as much power and influence as Enki or Marduk. 1. Nebo was known as the god of wisdom and the god of writing and scribes. 2. Nebo was the keeper of the tablets of destiny in which the fate of humankind was recorded. He was believed to engrave the destiny of each person, as the gods have decided, on the tablets of sacred record. Nebo had the power to increase or diminish the length of human life. 3. Just as Doyle declared in Isaiah 46:10, I am the one who from the beginning tells the end. The god Nebo told the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, the future shall be like the past. In similar fashion, Jesus proclaimed, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. 4. Nebo was worshipped as a fertility god and a god of water. He was the grandson of Enki, who was the original god of water. 5. Nebo was the last king of Babylon. Around 2000 BC, Babylonians and Assyrians addressed many prayers and inscriptions directly to Nebo. Hope this helps. Gerald OD. Mike Doyle, Deck 19th, 12:13 p.m. Hi Gerald. I respect your research and authority on the subject of the Anunnaki like no other. I was wondering if you have ever considered any alternative influences the Anunnaki have made in the geopolitical landscape. For example, I am lately inclined to believe the Anunnaki influence can be broken down as follows. 1. The Judeo-Christendom influence. 2. Include En.Ki to Marduk to Nebo to Moses to Jesus Christ. Countries such as England, United States, France, Italy, Spain, Australia fall into this realm. I am inclined to believe that the angry, warmongering, murdering God of the Old Testament represents Enlil's unduly influence, while the benevolent God of the Old and New Testaments corresponds to En.Ki. 2. The secular influence, to include Enlil and his offspring in opposition to En.Ki and Marduk. Countries such as Russia, China, North Korea fall into this realm. 3. The Islamic influence, to include Alulu and his offspring, and certain insurgent offspring of Enlil, to spawn the rise of Islam via Muhammad directly after Vatican City and the new global church state had been established. Note the cooperation between the secularists Enlil and the Islamists Alulu when building in opposition to En.Ki's rising Judeo-Christendom and the geopolitical church-state authority. Is it possible that there are three Anunnaki factions at play? Cheers, Mike. Gerald Clark Tech 20th, 3:20 a.m. Hi Mike, you are right on the money. Sounds like you are getting ready to publish. Mike Doyle Deck 21st, 5:52 a.m. Nice to know that you and I are thinking alike. Anything that I would publish would be trivial in comparison to what you have revealed on this subject. I humbly defer to your authority when it comes to the Anunnaki. I love the look on Christian faces when I tell them that when Moses received the Ten Commandments on Mt. Sinai, Mt. Sinai was related to the Sumerian/Babylonian altar of Ishtar/Inanna, and Mt. Nebo, where Moses spent his final days receiving the covenant of the Jewish people, was related to the Sumerian/Babylonian god Nebu. When you mention to Christians that, during the time of Moses for Christ's sake, the most popular gods that were prayed to and worshipped by the masses were Marduk and Nebu, descendants of En.Ki, who represent a Sumerian Anunnaki lineage of an otherworldly origin, they give you a blank stare of utter confusion, not disbelief, utter confusion. The only thing I might be able to add to this scenario is something that I have studied for many years, that being Norse mythology. As you know, the Norse mythology pantheon of gods can be directly correlated to the Greek and Roman pantheon of gods, and I suspect Odin was one of the Anunnaki, perhaps Marduk, when he fled Mesopotamia and lived as a wandering recluse in northern Europe waiting for his astrologically designated time to rule Eridu. I have studied the Elder Futhark runes quite intensely, as well as the 9 realms of Yggdrasil, and I believe there is really something to all of it. Did you know the Norse book they call the Ragnarok parallels the biblical book of Revelations to a T? The reason I mention this to you is when considering that Jesus was of Anunnaki lineage. I believe it is possible within the Northern European bloodline that descends from Odin, Marduk, to Anne of Glastonbury, the Jew high priestess who was Mary's mother, Jesus' grandmother of Anglo-Saxon descent. Have you ever looked into this connection? The runes are quite powerful, and I've even discovered references in the Bible where King Solomon was known to cast runes for divination. Anyway, sorry to ramble. I love what you're doing, all your work and research. Happy birthday, Gerald. And much love to you brother, Mike. Gerald Clark Tech 21st, 5:45 p.m. Hi Mike. As I mentioned, there is undoubtedly connections for the Anunnaki to all the world's religions. The problem is getting all the council member names correct, which takes much research. Thus, I did not choose to track them through Scandinavian countries or Asia where there are obvious connections. Perhaps this is your region to illuminate. Thanks for your support. Know that the preview of my new book has not been edited yet, so taking the risk by sharing where this story is going. That said, it will be fully edited before release in January. Mike Doyle Deck 22nd, 4:39 a.m. I look forward to your next book for sure. I'll see what else I can dig up in reference to the Norse mythology connection. By the way, my son is a youth minister in his Christian church, and I've emailed him about a dozen of your radio/internet broadcast interviews and pointed him to your books. Long story short, he is just as big a fan of yours as I am. He thinks you are amazing and, as a Christian, he senses that you might be the one man to finally connect all the dots and piece together all the loose ends. Speaking of which, the church and university lecture tour circuit can be quite lucrative, especially if dovetailed into the television talk show circuit. I think your work, to this point, is substantial enough to take to the mainstream audience. You have such an open-minded, gentle demeanor. I can see churches and universities being quite receptive to your message. Have you ever considered that universities might someday employ professors in their humanities and religious studies departments who teach a Sumerian Anunnaki curriculum that Gerald Clark has developed? You could be the first professor to do just that, and publish your own college textbook on the subject. After all, the world can no longer deny it. Everything you have revealed is historical fact. Gerald Clark, Tech 23rd, 8:12 p.m. Hi Mike, you flatter me on my birthday. I am so excited for you and your son, having such a profound theological and historical intersection that bring you closer in spirit. I long for the same result with my boys, both of which are in college now. The thought of developing a curriculum has not occurred to me, but after the revelations captured in my second book, the list of dots connected with include my old peers as well, the scientific community. I bring together string theory and multidimensional holographic realities to a final crescendo. You will love it. I can see this data at university levels for sure. Your words, as always my friend, inspire me, and I want to thank you personally for being on this discovery journey with both Krista and me. Kind regards, Gerald. Mike Doyle, Deck 30th, 5:53 a.m. Gerald, notice how the Amazon reviews are referring to your PhD level research in relation to your new book The Seventh Planet. I knew I was onto something there. I'm tellin', yeah, you can get an honorary PhD at a major university and start a whole new field of study on this stuff. I see lecture tours, television talk shows, textbooks published, the whole 9 yards. I said it first. You are the Einstein of your generation. Gerald Clark, Tech 30th, 2:43 p.m. You are too kind, Mike. I have given it some thought after doing the second book. I like academia sans sycophantic self-promoters looking for the security tenure offers. I desire to do a circuit as you described, although cannot imagine doing it in the destroyer's backyard until he is in a cage. How is your son doing? What school is he attending? My boys are also in college now. Mike Doyle, Deck 31st, 8:09 a.m. My son, Paul, graduated with a double major in English and Spanish. His mom is from Argentina. At the University of Dallas, a divinity school in Irving, Texas, he then began a 10-year stint as an on-site university youth minister for a Christian organization called The Church. You can find their churches in every major city around the world. In each city, the churches call themselves the Church of Irving, or the Church of Denver, or the Church of Seattle, etc. They even sent him to seminary school in California. This religious organization kept my son on a salary, with an apartment and automobile provided, all while he was married, wife Helka, with a son, Daniel. He recently took a position with NCH in Irving, Texas as a materials requisitions coordinator just prior to turning 30 years old. Elka is a stay-at-home wife and Daniel is only 4 years old at present. What's interesting is that when I referenced Xetariosichan, Paul replied, "Yep, the Anunnaki guy. I've read a lot of his research." Then, when I mentioned Michael Tellinger, he replied, "Oh, yeah, that guy from South Africa who found the gold mines." So, when I sensed that he had a more open mind than most Christians, I thought to myself, okay, it's time to introduce him to the modern-day guru on where mankind really came from and what is missing from the Bible. Paul's exact words after listening to your YouTube interviews and checking out your website and published works were, "Wow, this guy is awesome. Keep sending me more." Paul also added, "As I mentioned to you before, Gerald Clark may be the guy who puts it all together, who holds the missing pieces to the puzzle, and it could ultimately serve to strengthen people's faith." Interesting response, right? Like myself, my son alluded to the possibility that maybe it is our ultimatum to choose sides when the new evidence presents itself. There is, as you and I have discussed, the en.lil side of the fence, the alalu side of the fence, and the en.ki side of the fence. I believe en.ki and his lineage may correspond to the original Judeo-Christendom that led to the teachings of Jesus. More specifically, a divine lineage that led to the Jesus Christ we know as the Son of God, the Son of Man. En.lil basically interjected himself along the way, just to fuck things up. Imagine that. Similar to Scott Peck, your own writings and research lead you to a faith-based conclusion. Not that I would ever ask that of you. But what if your research inadvertently expressed to all of Judeo-Christendom that it is imperative that we choose sides? This war between two brothers, en.lil versus en.ki, and alalu entering the picture around 550 AD with Islam, could be the ultimate Shakespearean love triangle. It appears that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam may be continually hijacked by secularist en.lil factions that seek to destroy them all. It took me quite some time to realize what you were saying about en.lil, but I get it now. I finally realized that en.lil has undermined all efforts of mankind to enlighten himself and free himself from enslavement. Like the facade separation of church and state, it is almost as if en.lil and his lineage will always force themselves into the picture, as false Jews in the synagogues, as satanic infiltrators of the Vatican, as editors of the Bible during the Council of Nicaea, as secularist warmongers and slumlord sponsors of minimum wage slavery. What a monumental decision you are presenting to mankind, Gerald, when the ultimate choice between good and evil now has a face to the name. Perhaps the divine lineage of Anu, en.ki, Noah, Marduk, Moses, Nebu, Jesus, is what has kept mankind afloat through the centuries, and what en.lil and alalu have contrived in order to destroy the resulting Judeo-Christendom is quite evil, to say the least. If en.lil has his way, the end result may very well be the loss of hope, the loss of faith, the loss of love for one another, that en.ki and his lineage have tried so hard to uphold here on planet Eridu. I hope your sons can see the significance in what you are doing, as my son and I certainly do. Do not feel so separated from the realm of Judeo-Christendom, my friend. Your writings may reinvent, or redefine, Judeo-Christendom altogether. And when the world finally realizes why we must choose sides, Gerald Clark might be heralded as the Moses of his time. Happy New Year, Mike. Gerald Clark, Tech 31st, 11:36 p.m. Your eloquent words leave me speechless, Mike. Perhaps there is a story to tell, as I still feel the righteous teachings that were left by Jesus or whomever he was. His container had the energy of Nijashsita, which I finally was convicted as absolutely true after writing this last book. The mission and message feel complete now, at least for this mission. Mike Doyle, January 1st, 6:33 a.m. Nijashsita is said to be the son of Anu, which would make him one of the most powerful and influential of Sumerian gods. I have heard him equated to Quetzalcoatl and Thoth as well. Even more significant, I have also read that it is Nijashsita that may be the god of the new age of Aquarius, leaving behind the age of Pisces and Judeo-Christendom altogether. That is why, as always, I defer to your research in these matters. Gerald. My perspective may be outdated and rooted in the past. If you are fully convinced that Nijashita bears the absolute truth from your research, then your next book could very well herald in the dawning of a new age. I wonder if Nijashita will conceive a son of God, a son of man, like Jesus in the age of Pisces, to be the next prophet in the upcoming new age. Mike Doyle, January 1st, 6:36 a.m. Here is the source of my limited knowledge concerning Nijashita.